Welcome to Kitchen Table Finance, the podcast where we serve up bite-sized pieces of financial advice to simplify your money and your life.
Hey, Cole, welcome to the show.
Glad to be back, Mr. Nauta. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you're becoming a regular around here, filling in when Dave and I are gone. I love it.
Yeah, well, financial planners love their vacations, so that's why I'm here.
I meant to tell you that I would listen to you and Dave's last episode. Kudos, by the way. I really liked it. But also, you have a fantastic voice for radio, my friend. I'm jealous.
Thank you.
I'm jealous of your pipes.
I try. Voice and face for radio. So we can maybe just block out the picture and we'll be all right here.
We're on YouTube, so make sure you check us out on YouTube. You can check out Cole and all his glory. He's a handsome young man. With that being said, before it gets really awkward in here, we've got a fun episode today. I'm excited. I'm a little bit nervous. Why don't you tell the listeners what we're up to today, Cole?
Well, today we're going to do the first of potentially several editions of, I forget if we're calling it Stump the CFP or CFP v ChatGPT.
Yeah.
But essentially what we're doing is we're going to give ChatGPT some kind of basic, broad retirements and estate planning type questions. We're going to see what Nick has to say about that, and then we will cross-reference ChatGPT to see if we even have a purpose in this world anymore, Mr. Nauta.
I love it. Woo. Let's shake it out. Here we go. I've been preparing all day for this. I want you to know. I'm taking this challenge very
jumping
seriously.
Jacks, push-ups.
That's right.
He's ready to roll.
That's
all right. Well, you want to jump into the very first question here?
Yeah, shoot. Why don't you give us the first question, just so we know the basics. I did get the questions ahead of time. I was able to prepare some answers, but I did not review what ChatGPT said, so that's going to come as a surprise to me. So I'm going to shoot from the cuff here, and at the end of the 5 or 6 questions, depending on how many we can get through, maybe we'll let the listeners vote. We'll do a poll.
Yeah, exactly. We'll need it. I might be a little bit biased, so all right.
Fair enough.
So
that's why I chose you.
All right. So question number 1: how can I tell if I've saved enough for retirement? The big golden question that all clients have.
We deal with this a lot. It's pretty much, the number one question on people's mind. And, when I first hear this question, I always think you really can't. But I know that that's not a great answer, right? And the reason is there's just so many variables that go into it. And so here are the guidelines that I will give you in terms of like figuring out if you've saved enough for retirement. The first thing that you ought to do is look at your budget, right? Like create a retirement budget around what do you need in retirement to do the things that you want to do and live happily and be able to cover all of your basic expenses. And you can even break it down into like the category of like, here's what I need to run my household every month, like food, shelter, electricity, all that fun stuff. And then like, here's the stuff that makes me want to continue living life and enjoying life, and really kind of think through what that retirement budget is. And then from there, you can start to create your retirement income plan, right? And then it's about running different projections around if I have X amount of money and these are all my different sources. I got Social Security, maybe I got a pension, maybe I got some annuity money coming in, maybe I'm thinking about working part-time. Like what are all those income sources? And then how do those project out over the life of your retirement, right? And there's 3 different ways that you can kind of run projections that we do internally. One is, if you have a portfolio and we can run like an average return on that, right? So if you have a 60-40 portfolio, we might run a 5.5% every year throughout your retirement. Obviously, the problem with that is, as we are recently witnessing, the market isn't going to go up 5.5% every year. So you really have to think about like, how does that impact things? And so we will also do what's called a bad timing test, which is like, what if you retired in the beginning of the year and the market went down for 2 straight years? Like, how does that impact your plan? And then the one that we rely on heavily around here is actually a Monte Carlo simulator, where we're trying to solve for sequence of return risk and just looking at all of the possible different sequences of return over the life of your retirement plan to see how often you are successful, meaning you didn't run out of money. But I think, even with all of those really good tools that we have to kind of figure out if you've saved enough for retirement, the big one is being adaptable, right? Because we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to change. There's things that are going to change in the environment. There's things that are going to change in your plan, your budget, all of those things. And the biggest skill of successful retirees that I see is being adaptable, right? And being able to adjust your spending for a year or two if things aren't going well. Like there's a lot of things that you can control and you can do in bad times and in good times that are really going to allow you to make sure that you don't run out of money in retirement, or that you've saved enough, right? That you've got to that point where you can confidently retire and not worry about, eating. I actually had a client tell me this the other day, eating cat food out of your in the basement of some of your house, right? So that is my answer. What does ChatGPT say?
So ChatGPT gives 10 broad points, hits on a lot of things that you said, doesn't quite go into as in depth. But the first point that it says is to have a goal, which you talked about. Number 2, it talks about the 4% rule, which for those who don't know is kind of an older study now, but by no means is it a bad study, talking about withdrawal rates from your retirement portfolios. Basically, it states that a 4% withdrawal rate every year is, a relatively safe withdrawal rate, even though it's something that you should look at and review relatively consistently. It talks about retirement income replacement ratio, talks a little bit about Social Security. It gives some kind of rough guidelines of like a retirement savings targets by your age. So like, for example, it gives by age 30, you should have a year's salary saved. By 40, it should be 3 years. By 50, it should be 6 times, etc. So I don't know exactly where it's getting those numbers, but not a terrible guideline to have.
Sure.
Talks about budgeting like you did, using some different retirement calculators to your benefits, making sure that your investment growth and your risk tolerance levels are kind of in line, making sure that you are adjusting your numbers for inflation, which is very important, and to regularly review and adjust. So that's roughly what it's saying. So I think a decent answer on both parties thus far.
Yeah, I don't hate ChatGPT's answers. I mean, I take issue with a couple things. It seems to me like it's relying on a lot of like rule of thumb, like the 4% rule, right? Like the 4% rule is a great rule of thumb for like figuring out where you want to be retirement wise if you're like 20 or 30 years away. But when it comes down to like crunch time, actually really figuring out what that really means and what your actual withdrawal rate is and how your other income sources affect your withdrawal rate is much more important than, when you're 20 or 30, you can kind of get away with a rule of thumb, but not necessarily when you're 2 or 3 years out. So interesting though.
Yeah, completely agree.
Not
All right,
too
question number
bad,
2.
ChatGPT. Not too bad.
Yeah. Touche. All right, question number 2. How can I be sure that once my paycheck goes away after retirement, I won't run out of money?
So a lot of this we kind of covered in question number 1, but I had 3 points that I wanted to bring up in regards to not running out of money. I think the first one is to run projections, right? And figuring out like how long your income's going to last based on those 3 things that we talked about: average return, bad timing, Monte Carlo. And also like figuring out your income, where is it coming from? What are your income sources? How many of your income sources are guaranteed versus non-guaranteed? And then really looking at your budget and how those things compare, right? Retirement budget is so huge because it's one of those things like it's kind of easy to figure out, especially when you're close to retirement. But a lot of people just kind of skip over that process and say, hey, I could probably live on 70% of my current income, right? But maybe for some people that's probably true. For some people that's probably way low. And for some people that's probably way high. But so I think nailing that number down and running those projections is important. And then the second point is updating those regularly. So, yes, we can run projections, but the longer we run projections, the more likely they are to not come true, or different variables that we haven't considered come into play. And so making sure that you're updating those on a regular basis, especially because what we find a lot of times, especially with clients who are retiring, is there's things that come up that we didn't budget for, right? And so then it's a matter of, can we do that thing? How does it impact the plan? How does it impact the projections? Because it's never just, hey, we ran this plan and everything works out great, so here you go, take it and enjoy living it to the exact T, right? It's always like, hey, turns out I need a new roof and I wasn't planning on that for 5 years. How's that impact my plan? Or I want to buy a new car. I want to travel. All of these things kind of come up and change over time. And so being able to look at the plan and how those decisions impact the plan and updating it on a regular basis is super important, because the sooner we can find that things are going off track, the easier it is to correct that, right? If we dig our head in the sand and we're going off track for 10 years, and then we kind of have that come to Jesus meeting, and it might be too late, right? And then the changes aren't just take a little bit less every month. The changes are drastic at that point. And then the last point that I put was just to be adaptable. So, if you have good years, we can always kind of take a little bit more. If we have bad years, maybe we take a little bit less. Had a great conversation with a client this week about that kind of thing. She loves traveling, travels all over the place, and travels like her big thing. But she also realizes that if things continue to get worse, she might not be able to do all the traveling she wants. She might have to cut it back for a couple of years to let her portfolio go back. And those are the kinds of things, especially if you plan them ahead of time, where it can make a big difference in terms of the longevity and making sure you don't run out of money, is being adaptable to making those changes and taking a year off, or skipping a trip or two, if that's going to impact the outcome of your plan.
Sure. No, I think this is a very solid answer, Mr.
How do we do?
Mr. CFP. Not too bad. So ChatGPT gives a number of bullet points. So I'll just go over on a high level, and then it does kind of provide like a little couple sentence summary. So for one, it says to create a detailed retirement budget. 2 is to determine how much you need to save, which kind of goes back. It's drawing back to like the 4% rule that we were talking about in the previous question. 3rd is to make sure that your portfolio is adequately diversified. Number 4 is to make sure that you have some reliable income streams that aren't exclusively tied up in the market. Things like Social Security, a pension, some annuities, rental income, stuff like that. 5 is talking about having an emergency fund. 6 is talking about monitoring your healthcare costs, which we will get into in the next question. 7 is to make sure that you're withdrawing conservatively from your portfolio. 8 is to monitor your investments regularly and to be willing to be flexible. Number 9 is to consider downsizing. Number 11 is to work with a financial planner, specifically a certified financial planner at CFP. And 12 is to
ChatGPT more and more as we go along here.
I know. And 12 is to plan for longevity, because there's plenty of people out there that don't think they're going to live into their 90s or to triple digits, but people do all the time.
Yeah.
So in summary, it says you can protect yourself from running out of money in retirement by ensuring that you have a mix of reliable income sources, a solid budget, diversified investments, and a plan for withdrawing money sustainably. Regularly reviewing and adjusting your plan as needed will also give you peace of mind as you approach and enjoy your retirement.
I like it. Actually, ChatGPT brought up a couple things that I didn't think of, which, if Dave was here, I'm sure he'd be shocked about, because it seems like every episode we talk about emergency funds and cash reserves. And I didn't bring that up, but I love that point, especially when you're in retirement income phase of having cash. Because if the market goes down and you've got a portfolio and you've got some cash outside of that you can use to kind of bide your time, so that we don't have to go in and sell your investments in a down market, and we can wait until things get better and improve and then replenish your cash, that can make a whole world of difference. So I love that idea of emergency fund. And I also, we get along quite well when it comes to budget, because we both brought up budget a couple times already, which is kind of one of those things that sometimes we skip over, but is super important, especially when it comes to retirement income and making sure you're okay.
Everybody needs a budget, even if you're not retired. Everybody needs a budget.
That's right, except for maybe Warren Buffett. I think he can probably get away with spending whatever he wants, but he also doesn't spend any money. So
That's true.
From what I hear,
I think I saw something. Well, I think I saw something like a couple of years ago that he gets like the same McDonald's breakfast every day, and he has like the exact cash and change like counted out every morning that's ready. It's like whatever, it's like $3.31. Like I think even he is very structured in the way that he does
Well,
it.
I think McDonald's ended up giving him like a gold card, so he gets it for free now because that's what he needed, free breakfast.
That's exactly what Warren Buffett needs. All right, so let's move on to question number 3, getting into healthcare. So how do I plan for healthcare and long-term costs in retirement?
Yeah, so this is a big one for, and I focused on the healthcare side here. I actually went into long-term care a little bit later, but from a healthcare standpoint, it's always kind of a big one, especially for retirees. There's 2 sides to it, right? There's pre-65 healthcare, and then there's 65 healthcare, 65 and above, right? And because 65 is the age that you qualify for Medicare, and so if you're retiring before 65 and you don't have healthcare through work, there are some things that you need to look through in terms of costs. The marketplace. So there's no like pre-existing condition exclusions. So you can go out and you can get a policy through the marketplace if you need to. There's factors that go into that, such as what your income will be. And one of the planning aspects of that is, can you adjust your income in order to qualify for the premium subsidies? So there's some maneuvering that you can do, but the big thing is getting with a good agent to figure out what kind of coverage that you need and how and what. So like, what's the best, given your health situation, what's the best plan for you, and what are the costs of that going to be from the standpoint of, hey, this is your premium, this is your copays, out of pocket, so you can kind of estimate all of that and make a plan for it. And then 65, when you turn 65, you get on Medicare. And then it's that same kind of question of like figuring out what your health level is and if that's likely to change as far as like long-term planning, looking throughout your entire retirement, and then choosing the right supplemental plan. So whether it's Medicare Advantage or Medigap. And then the big thing for health insurance that we do around here is we make sure that we plan for those costs to go up, because the cost of insurance and the cost of medical care is outpacing general, inflation by quite a bit. And so we always try to break out those expenses and inflate them at closer to 5 or 6%, which is what the average has been for medical care, as opposed to the 2.5, 3 that we've seen for other categories. And so I think the big thing is just figuring out what those costs will actually be, and making sure that you're prepared for them and you've planned for them, not only now, but also the increasing cost of them along the way. And then another thing that I didn't throw in here that's super important too is the thing that you have the most control over is your health in general, right? And so planning for like, how are you going to stay healthy? What kind of costs are those going to be? Is it, do you need a, gym membership? Do you need a personal trainer? Do you need a health coach? Like all of those things cost money, but also ultimately, typically, if things go well, end up saving you money on the insurance side of things and what your actual healthcare expenses are. So really focusing in on what you can control, which is your overall health level.
Yeah, no, I think that's really strong. And I think that the maintaining your own health and understanding that you have a lot of say in that is something that kind of gets overlooked in these financial discussions.
Yeah.
Staying healthy, investing in exercise equipment, gym membership, nutritionists, things like that. I mean, that's it's a really good way to keep those healthcare costs down.
Yeah.
So on the GPT side of things, number 1, it says to understand your healthcare needs in retirement. Talks about Medicare, talks about Medicaid, out-of-pocket costs, things like that. It says to try to get an estimate of what your future healthcare costs may be. It talks about a little bit about long-term care, specifically preparing for that, what that can look like. It gives a little bit of a discussion about long-term care policies, talking a little bit about things like Medicaid, nursing homes, things like that. It does talk, which we are big advocates of, HSAs, making sure that you are adequately investing into your health savings accounts. Also talks about considering your own health and your family history. If you have maybe a history of things like diabetes or health conditions or heart conditions, things like that. Also talks about considering working with a financial planner. So in summary, it says the planning for healthcare and long-term care costs in retirement involves understanding your potential healthcare needs, estimating future costs, and exploring options like Medicare, long-term care insurance, and Medicaid. It's crucial to factor these expenses into your retirement budgets, invest in health savings accounts, and consider hybrid insurance products for self-funding options. Regularly reviewing your plan and adjusting for future healthcare needs will ensure that you're well prepared for the high costs of medical care and long-term care as you age. So
not far off. I think the big difference is, I would add to that, like I talked about a little bit, is investing in your own health, right? Like stay healthy. Biggest thing that you can do.
I completely agree. Completely agree. All right. So now we move on to everybody's favorite subject, which is taxes. So the question is, how can I reduce my tax exposure in retirement?
It's a big one. Got a lot of notes here. Create a tax plan, right? So thinking about it in terms of the goal of tax planning is to pay taxes at the lowest rate possible, right? Now, the issue with that is you got to figure out what that means, because it's a moving target, right? And so the first thing you got to do is figure out what you currently pay in taxes, like what's your current tax rate? And then you got to estimate your future tax rates, right? And that becomes the problem of the moving target, because you can use the current tax code, but tax codes change, tax laws change, things change, and that can potentially impact your ability to compare the two, right? So other things being equal, if it looks like in the future your income's going to be way higher and that's going to push you up tax brackets, it might make sense to even that out by pushing some of that income into earlier years of retirement versus later years of retirement. But the hard part is knowing how that, what is going to happen in 10 years as far as tax law changes, things like that. So, and a couple of other things that you need to make sure that you plan for when it comes to trying to estimate those future rates. It's not just what tax bracket you're in, but there's some other kind of gotcha things that you got to think about, right? What are the impacts of required minimum distributions from pre-tax retirement accounts? What are the impacts of your Social Security? Because your Social Security is taxed based on how much income that you have. What are the impacts of the IRMA, which is the premium on Medicare? And the higher your income, the more you pay for Medicare insurance. And then there is also the impact on marketplace premium subsidies. So if you are pre-65, your income determines if you get a premium subsidy or not. So that can have an impact. There's also potential impact to tax law changes, kind of keeping up to date on what those are and how that might impact things. And then also the lowest down the list, but something you should still think about is, are you going to have money left over? What's the impact of the inheritance? So now you're not necessarily just planning on what's my tax rate, but what are my beneficiaries' tax rates likely to be, because that also can have a big impact on some of the tax planning decisions that you make. So once you figure all that out, Cole, then there's some different strategies, right? We can talk about how do we advance some income or take income sooner rather than later, if that's the strategy that you want to go to, being that you're in a lower tax bracket now than you will be in the future or are likely to be. You can consider Roth conversions. You consider tax loss harvesting or tax gain harvesting. You can also consider where you fall in terms of what you would pay on long-term cap gains. Are you in the 0% and the 15%? Does that impact some of those decisions? And then also, what are your withdrawal strategies? So when are you taking Social Security, and how are you supplementing your income? Are you taking out of taxable accounts? Are you taking out of pre-tax accounts? Are you taking out of tax-free accounts? And in what order should you take out of those accounts? And the other big thing is this stuff changes on a regular basis. So it's really something that you have to assess and review every year, because as things change, as accounts grow, as accounts get smaller, some of those decisions that you may have planned 5 years ago maybe don't make sense anymore, right? And the tax laws will also change. So it's something that has to be reviewed regularly. And the reality of this whole long speech of mine is you may never actually get it right, because there's just a lot of variables going on. And someday somebody could come in and pull the plug and say, guess what? We're not doing tax brackets anymore. We're going to do a national sales tax. Good luck with that. So do I think that's going to happen? No. Is it a possibility? Sure. Anything's possible, right? And so thinking through that, and also, and the reason I bring that up is like, what's the default option? Like, if you get it wrong by chance for some reason, what kind of position did you put yourself in, right? And this is really comes into like the Roth conversion side of things. Of if you did some tax planning and you ended up doing some conversions, and at the end of the day, maybe you didn't get it perfectly right. Maybe you paid a little bit more in taxes than you could have by not doing some of those conversions. The default option of that is your kids get a big chunk of tax-free money someday, right? That's not a bad default option if you don't get it perfect. So also kind of think through like some of the impact of the decisions of, we don't live in a perfect world, and these decisions are going to change year over year, and you might not get it exactly right. So what does it mean if you don't?
I like that, Mr. Nauta. I like that. Okay, so ChatGPT has a number of points. Point number one, make sure that you're utilizing tax-advantaged accounts like Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, 401ks, IRAs, things like that, health savings accounts, and taxable investment accounts. Two is to be strategic about the way that you're using your Social Security withdrawals, particularly seeing if you can, wait until full retirement age at 67, or if you can, wait to 70 even to get even more. Three is to, use some of the strategies that you were mentioning, things like Roth conversions, contributing to Roths, things like that, to minimize your required minimum distributions when you turn 73. Option number four is to consider your state taxes. So obviously states like Florida, Texas, and Nevada have no state income tax, which is potentially why there's a lot of retirees in those states. Five is talking about tax efficient withdrawal strategies, making sure that you are determining which order that you're going to be taking money out of your accounts. Talking about tax deferred, taxable accounts, and tax-free accounts like Roths. Six is to try to manage the amount of capital gains tax that you're paying in any given year. Seven talks a little bit about muni bonds, municipal bonds, which are tax-free. Number eight talks about some charitable giving, things like qualified charitable distributions, which we do a lot of every year. Nine talks about considering some tax-deferred growth for investments, things like real estate, 1031 exchanges, stuff like that, which we don't do a ton with. And 10 recommends that you talk to a tax planning professional, which is always a good default. So going through the summary here, it says, while you can't avoid taxes entirely in retirement, there are many ways to minimize them, contributing to Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks, health savings accounts, and carefully managing your Social Security withdrawals. And being strategic about your RMDs are just a few ways that you can reduce your tax burden. You can also take advantage of state-specific tax policies, use tax-efficient withdrawal strategies, and consider tax-advantaged investments like municipal bonds. Ultimately, working with a financial planner or tax advisor can help you implement these strategies effectively. They just keep plugging us. They just keep on
love that.
referring prospects.
So I like that answer. I guess I kind of missed the first step in all of this that ChatGPT nailed, which is like you have to have money in these tax advantage plans to begin with, right? It's the second time they brought up HSAs, which I'm a huge fan of. Lots of different things that you can do, lots of flexibility with an HSA account, especially into retirement, which I think is great. One thing that they didn't bring up that I thought of too is just like location of different investments based on the accounts that you have. And so, if your overall portfolio, you want to be somewhere around 60-40, that doesn't mean you're going to have the same exact portfolio in every one of your accounts, because the taxes are different and you're using them differently. So like the tax location of where you put your more aggressive investments versus your more conservative investments and how they're taxed does have a big impact on your overall tax planning. So tax location also very important, but not too shabby. ChatGPT, not too shabby.
Our next question has to do with inflation. So we just have the real simple, how do I plan for inflation during retirement, Mr. Nauta?
Inflation feels like that's everything I talk about these days. Inflation. Unsurprisingly, the first point that I wrote was adaptability, right? Just being able to adapt in an inflationary environment, I think is super important. Just thinking through what you need and what you would like to do and what you wish you could do, and kind of using that in your plan. And as things change and as things get more expensive, being adaptable and kind of potentially cutting off some of those things if you need to, because things are getting more expensive, right? But always put inflation into your projections, right? Like, don't pretend like your expenses are going to be the same on day one of retirement as in year 30 of your retirement. The other thing that I see a lot is we kind of, most people spend in what we would consider a smile, right? And so, the first years, the go-go years, we're typically spending more, and then it kind of tapers off a little bit. And then later on in life, health costs and things like that start to pick up. And so just being mindful of that when it comes to inflation. You might be spending a little bit more in the beginning of retirement, and that doesn't necessarily mean you will always spend that much. And so kind of playing through how that impacts your overall plan. The other thing that I see quite commonly is, we're adaptable as humans, very adaptable, right? I think back to like in college, I was perfectly happy with ramen noodles and cheap beer. I probably wouldn't go back to that today, right? But in college I was. And so, not saying in retirement that you're going to go to ramen noodles and beer, but as things get more expensive, we just kind of have this natural ability to cut and move things where it makes sense. Even though in every plan that we do, we project it for you to take more income every year, a lot of people don't take us up on that, right? And so the point that I want to make here is you should every year, if the plan is to take more money so that you're kind of keeping up with inflation and we're not arbitrarily depriving you of things yourself of things that maybe you don't have to. And then, I did start, it took me to question 5 to start talking about investing in portfolios, but a diversified portfolio that includes growth, right? And so if you're thinking about a 30-year retirement, that probably means that you don't want to put everything in cash, because that growth portion of your portfolio is going to need to provide you with extra money later on in retirement, right? And Dave and I had this come up in our retirement headline review last week about, do I need stocks anymore in my portfolio, right? And the answer is, if you have a 30-year retirement, you're going to need some growth, and that usually comes in the form of stocks. And so thinking through how your portfolio is structured, how it's going to grow and allow you to keep up with inflation is a super important part of this. But that certainly doesn't mean that we want you to put everything 100% into stocks either. So maintaining that right diversification, maintaining that right balance between risk and reward and how it relates to your overall plan to keep up with inflation is super important. And then, the last point is, don't keep too much into cash and safe investments, because historically they do not pace well with inflation. And so that can be like the downfall. The flip side of not having a diversified portfolio is, if you don't have enough growth, you won't be able to keep up, and you won't be able to, maintain those extra income every year that inflation kind of brings in later on in retirement. Those are my points. Cole, what does chat say?
Chat says, okay, point number 1 is to do your best to estimate future costs and factor inflation into those. It gives kind of like a 2 to 3% a year as it's kind of historical inflation, which is pretty close. Point number 2 is to invest in assets that are going to outpace inflation. It talks about things like stocks and real estate as the primary 2. Third point is to use inflation protected securities. Specifically talks about TIPS, which are Treasury inflation protected securities, which are basically just kind of like T-bill bonds that are backed by the government that have an inflation adjustment element in them. 4 is to make sure that you have a diverse portfolio. 5 is to factor in some of those rising healthcare costs. Obviously, we talked earlier that the healthcare costs tend to go up faster than the normal rate of inflation. 6 is to consider the COLA, or the cost of living adjustments that are baked into Social Security. 7 is to potentially delay retirement more to allow more time for growth. 8 talks about keeping some flexibility in your spending plan, which we are big advocates for. 9 talks about adjustable annuities. 10 talks about some making sure that you're being tax efficient in the way that you're withdrawing your assets. If you make some big tax boo-boos, suddenly that can mean that your costs go up pretty dramatically. And 11 is to make sure that you're staying informed and that you adjust things regularly. So, in summary, it says to effectively plan for inflation during retirement, you need to incorporate assets that can outpace inflation, like stocks, tips, and real estate. Building a diversified portfolio, consider inflation adjusted income streams such as Social Security and annuities, and plan for rising healthcare costs. Staying flexible with your spending, using tax efficient withdrawal strategies, and adjusting your plan regularly will also help ensure that you are prepared to maintain your purchasing power throughout retirement despite inflation.
Interesting. Stocks, tips, and real estate. That's all I need, right?
Yeah, that's all you need.
Kind of what I like about chat is, the more I use it, the more it like makes me think about certain things and brings up points, but it's not, the cohesive strategy piece isn't there. And then,
Sure.
I think the other thing too is we're going very, very technical right now, which is kind of what ChatGPT does, right? But what are the emotional sides of all these things? And that's something that you're never going to get out of a chatbot, right? You're not going to get the emotional side, and it's extreme. The information has always been out there, right? We just created this new way to get all of that information and distill it down and make it easier for you to access. But the information's always been out there, and yet most people need a certified financial planner to help them think through this stuff, not only from the technical side because they don't want to, but also from the emotional side, right? And the emotions that are involved in inflation or retirement in general or tax planning, like a lot of that is stuff that you're not going to get in the technical aspect of, hey, think about these 10 things. But what about the emotional burden that some of that takes, and making sure that you have someone that can guide you through those ups and downs, right? Because there's a lot of things that are going to happen in a 30-year retirement. Some of them are going to be good and some of them are going to be not so good. And having somebody reliable that you can talk through those things with is huge, right? And as you've seen in our meetings recently, you've been here for coming up on a year, and the first year things were pretty good, right? And now things are getting a little bit choppier out there, and people are a little bit more concerned, and they're paying a little bit more attention to the stuff that we're telling them because there's some concern over there anytime the market goes down. And so, that's one of those things where you just need that person that can kind of empathize with you and is kind of on the same side of the table as you, trying to get you through that so you don't make those emotional decisions, right?
Sure.
So, Cole, you get the first shot here at who won the battle, the CFP or the chatbot.
Wow.
Don't screw this up.
Wow.
There's only one right answer.
You can't beat a CFP. You just can't. In all seriousness, I think Chat gave some really good high level kind of 30,000 foot view of things to consider. And I think using these tools, even for professionals, is a really good way to just kind of hit you with a bunch of different points, a bunch of different information, something that maybe you already knew but had forgotten about, didn't really consider, things like that to help you kind of brush up. But yeah, like you said, everybody who goes into this world thinks that it's just kind of numbers and returns. And really what it is it's a people business.
Right.
The value that we provide is, to be able to take all that information, distill it down, make it easier for people to understand. And most importantly, I think, to help them through some of those really difficult times when things get scary. Because it's really easy when things are going great to just be like, well, this is the plan. We're going to hold steady. We're not going to sell. We're going to not panic when things get weird. But when things get weird, it's the Mike Tyson quote, right? Everybody's got a plan till you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So having somebody there to help you stay calm, to, remind you of the long term and to, provide you with a little bit more context for what's going on, I think is really some of the great value that CFPs provide to clients.
Yeah. And I think, overall from like a client perspective or from our listeners, like I would encourage my clients or listeners in general, like use ChatGPT, like ask it some questions so that you can then go to your financial planner and say, hey, what about this? And it really kind of helps educate you more on like a basic level, because I can almost guarantee you all the things that were brought up there are things that we think about and we build into financial plans. But we don't always address all of them, right? We don't always tell you that, we did look at inflation and this is how, and this is why, and this is what we're doing as a result of that. But the more you can educate yourself on the consumer side, the better discussions that you can have so that when these things creep up, or when they impact you, you're not blindsided by it, right? And so working with a system like ChatGPT to give you all those those 10 different things you should think about, and bring in some of those that you maybe haven't talked about with your financial planner to see how they're being addressed, I think is a great way for people to use a system like this to, get more education and be more aware of what's going on and why it's going on.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Ms. Shinoda.
Well, this has been fun. To our listeners, feel free to shoot us an email at info@srbadvisors.com with who you think won the CFP versus the chatbot battle today. We would love to hear it. And also, if you have questions or topics that you would like us to for round 2 of our CFP versus ChatGPT battle, shoot those over as well. We would love to hear them. Cole, it has been a pleasure, my friend. Until next time.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Thank you for joining us for another chat about your retirement and finances. Please hit that subscribe button. You can also contact us at srbadvisors.com or email us at info@srbadvisors.com. See you next time on Kitchen Table Finance.
This is a Zedia Media production.